Well, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Young Life podcast. Ben, super smiley down there. So glad to have our cast with us. Why don't you guys take a quick minute and introduce yourself? Go for it.
Who goes first? I'll go first. My name is Elliot. I host the Open Concepts podcast every Tuesday. It comes out at 10 a.m. I'm also a French studies student at York University.
Podcast mogul. Get it while it's hot.
That's right.
My name's Aiden. I'm a Bible college student with Vanguard College, and I host the TYL small group with Ben on Monday nights.
Represent. Benny.
And I'm Ben. I host a small group with Aiden. Hi.
Hi. Dude, what's with, like, Aiden had a weird introduction the other day too. Look, guys,
What's wrong with y'all?
we need to have a competition because I have an amazing blooper of Ben that he definitely would not want released, and I'm just itching to put it out there. So we'll find some sort of competition.
In the chat if you want to see that.
Maybe if we get like 200 views or 300 views on our podcast, we'll drop it. We got to come up with some sort of competition. Anyway, we're so glad you're here with an episode of the Young Life podcast. We're everywhere that you want to be. We're on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, everywhere. Again, always privileged that you join us online. So a little bit awkward. Like, here's the thing. Last week we made a big deal about how we were going to be in person on March 8th. And then, of course, as soon as you finish recording it, everything has to change. So obviously we're back online, and we will be back online until further notice. But while we're online, again, I want to remind you of two ways you can connect. Of course, you can join us in the Young Life podcast like you're doing right now, but we also have two small groups running. We have the Young Life small group with Ben and Aiden on Sunday nights at 7:30, and Jody Speck is starting a women's Bible study going through the book of Acts. That's going to be Thursday nights at 7. And so you can DM us directly. You'll have information on our social and ways you can connect there. But make sure you're staying connected. If you're feeling disconnected, jump in. There's lots of places to get to meet people. Our small groups are a great place to talk face-to-face. Well, Zoom to Zoom, but actually get some interaction in there. It'd be awesome. Well, tonight, heading into lockdown and the struggles and the frustration all that brings, I want to talk about overcoming evil, frustration, anger, challenging situations in people with good. And that's what we're talking about tonight. A few weeks ago, we talked about wanting to be people that let light in the load. And I feel like as these lockdowns become more normal and more maybe of a regular occurrence, for better, for worse, however people feel about that, I'm not saying either way. I'm just saying as they become more regular, I think a more intentional response for us is needed to make sure that we are maintaining the character of life that Christ calls for us. And, there's lots of businesses in town struggling. The murmuring online you can't miss it, regardless how you feel about it. It's people are struggling. They're upset. And so we want to put out a challenge for our Young Life crew on Monday nights. We want to challenge you to eat local on Monday nights. So as we meet for the Young Life podcast, what's your favorite spot in town, a local spot? You can pick Kelsey's. I would encourage you to maybe pick a smaller business if you want to try some new food. We're going to ask you to buy it, sit down. It's one thing to complain about small businesses being attacked online. It's another thing to kind of take responsibility and be like, I'm going to buy something from every Monday night, a different one. You take a picture, post it. Young Life will repost it, and at least, you're supporting them with your finances, and we can kind of put the word out there that they make awesome food, and hopefully other people support them as well. And so that's our question for our cast tonight. Man, next week, people are going to be looking for something to eat, something to do, a way to support a local business. What is your go-to place, a place in Barrie that is like your go-to? You love it.
Donnelly's for me. Big ups. You get
Donnelly's.
Mac and cheese. You get your poutine with your Bailey sauce if you want. Up to you.
Ooh.
That's good. Okay. Best place to go get stuff. And it's local, so it's good.
The deep fried pickles are nuts.
Yeah, I've tried those.
Irish nachos. Have you guys ever had Irish nachos?
Yeah.
Those
that's
so
that's a
good.
one dish. You don't order anything else. That's your meal.
Yeah, for like a week. It's so bad for you. You have to you're walking home from Donnelly's after that one. Someone else jump in. Like what's another favorite spot?
I'm a big breakfast guy. I love the Dunlop Diner. It's quality breakfast. Their eggs Benny. They've got like 7 different kinds of eggs Benedict, and they really do it up. Skillets, all breakfast lovers. I definitely recommend Dunlop Diner.
Wait, there's 7 different kinds of eggs Benedict?
Oh man, they just
What?
they load up on these crazy toppings. It's like it's a food lover's heaven. I'm telling you.
All right.
I'd never even heard of it, and Aiden took me there. And
Yeah.
this is a weird thing to think is the
Oh,
best,
that's
but
cute.
they have amazing hash browns. Ben, would you like to be
They're-
invited next time?
Ben
I'm
Ben's
just
jealous.
saying, it's
Ben
cute.
wants to go.
He
Yeah.
ate it in Scotland for breakfast.
Okay, we'll go.
Aw.
We'll
Ben,
go.
Ben, I'll take
Come
you.
on.
I'll take you, Ben.
I don't want to go with you, Elliot.
All right, yo, chill. I'm trying to be nice.
They have amazing hash browns. Check them out. We got Donnelly's. We have Dunlop Diner. Ben, where would you like us to take you for lunch?
That's a really weird way to ask that.
Circle K. No, I'm
Circle-
kidding.
Okay,
What's one
bro.
of your favorite spots in Barrie?
The green mango tree. It's got
Oh,
like
yeah.
really good Thai food.
Where is
Like
that?
really good. It's on Mapleview by Mapleview and
By the Home Depot, like by the Home
Barrie View
Depot.
Drive, right? Barrie View Drive.
yeah, it's across from like where the McDonald's is and like where the Lazy Boy, I guess it used to be Chapters, in that plaza over there. It's really
Thai
good.
food's good.
Oh, yeah.
One I did take out from the other day was Big Pho. Big Pho is really good.
That
Love
was great.
pho.
It's pho. It's pho.
Pho.
It's pho.
Pho.
Pho. I'm gonna
Pho.
keep calling it
Pho.
pho. It's amazing. You gotta check that place out. Also, if you're a coffee lover, best in my opinion that I've tried so far, best coffee in Barrie is at Common Good Cafe. That would be worth ordering in. It's Propeller Espresso. It's amazing.
That
Like
is
if you're
good
going
coffee.
for like good coffee, skip Starbucks, go to Common Good. It's unreal. Check it out. Just a few of our favorite spots. Also, before I got my haircut, I used to go to History Barbershop, but I feel like I can't really give a whole lot of suggestions about that anymore. But they're doing some cool stuff over there for some local businesses trying to support all the stuff that's going on. And so in the next week, be conscious. What's some way you can support a local business? Next Monday, why don't you order in for someone local, whether it's Donnelly's, Dunlop Diner may not be open, but Mango Tree, Big Pho, whatever it's called. And just go check it out. Maybe stop by for a coffee at Common Good. Want to make sure we're being proactive. If we care about something and something's important to us, we want to show love and care in our community. Let's not just be angry about it. Let's do something about it. And so I think we can put our money where our mouth is and go, hey, I'm going to support local businesses if that's something that's important to me, which I think it should be. I'm sympathetic lately that these people's livelihoods and trying to put myself in the perspective of the other. One thing I never really realized, I was just talking to someone whose mom owns a restaurant, like just the cost of ordering alcohol alone and the shelf life that has is enough to tank a business, which is terrible. And so if we can, maybe don't buy them out of alcohol, but if you can, support a local business and order food in for next Monday night. And at the very least, maybe buy a gift card for next time that they're open. Go check it out. It'd be amazing. And, that's kind of what we're talking about tonight. We want to talk about how to really show love in our community and how to overcome evil and frustration and challenges with love and good. And, we sit down with Jason Weening. He's one of our pastors on staff at Mapleview. And he's kind of introduced me to this idea of non-resistance. Have you guys ever heard of non-resistance? No, I hadn't either.
No.
And it's different than being like a pacifist. Like a pacifist would be like, there's only peace when there's no more war. And non-resistance is the idea that because of our faith, we can have peace and demonstrate peace and fight for peace in the middle of really challenging circumstances. And that idea and that notion has only grown louder in my head, my heart and mind, especially with all the stuff that's happening and the response that people are having to this latest lockdown measures. And so we're talking about that. We're going to jump into our Young Life download coming up right now, and then a really great conversation with Jason coming up. Can't wait for you to check it out right now. Well, today I want to talk a little bit about an eye for an eye. As you can see, we are not in person this week. Last week, I made a big deal at the end of the show about how we're going to be in person on March 8th. And obviously, the plan has changed. Since our last podcast, Simcoe Muskoka has been moved back into the gray zone. Understandably, it's made a lot of people frustrated, angry, disappointed, upset, all the emotions that come with that. And, it's not just because of a slight inconvenience or disruption, but there are legitimate stakes for people in their lives. I feel like I always want to do my best to be a lifelong learner and try to understand the perspectives of other people. And, there are people fearing for their livelihood. There are people who are struggling in their relationships or maybe lack thereof relationships, and families trying to find their way, teaching from home, students, teachers, all the things that come with that. And, I think it's important in situations and moments like these that we choose to try to put ourselves in the position and the perspective of the other. That we can try and understand and see the world through their eyes, so we can have compassion and empathy. One of my favorite things about Jesus that I like to try and take notice of is that Jesus very much, before he responds in his authority and the power that comes with being who he is and all that he can do, Jesus chose to respond in empathy first. And I think that's something we need to practice for our life. We'll be people who practice empathy before we practice our authority that God has given us. And this world is full of injustice, pain, challenging situations, challenging people, and just evil. And how do we respond as believers? How are we to engage? What's our next step? We've encountered evil, we've encountered challenging people, we've encountered an injustice. Now what? What do we do? That's where this idea of an eye for an eye can kind of come as a justification sometimes. That's actually found in Exodus 21:24. And it says, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and a hand for a hand, and a foot for a foot. And it sounds a lot like a biblical justification to get even. When injustice or challenges come and you're wronged, you can wrong to the same extent that they wronged you. You take mine, I'll take yours. You hit me, I hit you. You tick me off online, I'm going to tick you off online, and so on, an eye for an eye. And although, yes, it's an Old Testament principle of cause and effect, and it's there, and we like to sometimes use it as a grounds for justification. Well, an eye for an eye, he got what he was coming to him. It's not really a justification for our anger and wanting to clap back against things that we see as injustices or things that are evil in this world. In fact, as Jesus followers, our question should always be, is there a better way? From the way I want to respond, my natural inclination. And sometimes there is, and maybe there isn't. But the question should always be, through the lens of Jesus and my faith, is there a better way? And so tonight, I want to challenge us to not just settle for a justified response, but that as followers of Jesus and people who want to respond in empathy before we respond in authority, is there a compassionate response? A compassionate response to evil and to brokenness and to frustration in our lives. Our grace is founded on the principle and the understanding that there is a grace for us that we did not earn or deserve, and yet it is freely given. And so, in the same spirit, would we choose to adopt the same ideology that has been given to us to say, I want to be someone who extends and displays grace that had not been earned or deserved. The compassionate, gracious response that God gives us every day, would we let that be an extension? In Matthew 5, Jesus is teaching his most famous message, referred to as the Sermon on the Mount. And this is what verse 38 to 48 says. Have you heard the law that says the punishment must match the injury, an eye for an eye, or tooth for a tooth? Again, he's quoting Exodus here. But I say, do not resist an evil person. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, offer them the other cheek also. If you are sued in court and your shirt is taken away from you, give your coat too. If a soldier demands that you carry his gear for a mile, carry it for 2 miles. Give to those who ask and don't turn away from those who want to borrow. Verse 43, he says this. You have heard the law that says, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say, love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In that way, you'll be acting as a true child of your Father in heaven. For he gives his sunlight on both the evil and the good, and he sends his rain on the just and the unjust. If you love only those who love you, what reward is there in that? Even corrupt tax collectors do that much. If you're only kind to your friends, how are you any different from anybody else? Even the non-believers do that. But you are to be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect. It's actually a very challenging passage. I don't want to skip over the significance and the high challenge and call and charge that's found in this passage of Scripture. But what Jesus is saying is, hey, don't allow us to settle for the justification reasoning in our human condition of wanting to get even. He goes, hey, when you encounter evil or injustice or challenging moments and challenging people, push yourself beyond the status quo. Push yourself beyond what is even reasonable to say, hey, well, we choose to have a compassionate response. And so the question now becomes, what does that mean for my life and yours? Is there ever a place where justice can be upheld as believers, that we stand up for ourselves in spirit and truth and push back? Because this passage can paint things in a light where it's, you know what, let be what's going to be and just let it wash over you and trust God with it. And yet, I think although we can choose to have a compassionate response, there's still areas of our life where we stand up for truth and justice and we fight for what is right. Although that word fight might be a contention, because as believers, how we fight is different than how the world chooses to fight. I think of some very meaningful cultural moments in the last few years, even the Me Too movement that has come to light, and the liberation of women in systems all over the world and organizations all over the world coming to light about the injustice done to them, the silencing of victims, and the position that people of authority have put others in. I think we have a responsibility to stand up for that justice and to stand up for the goodness and the wholesomeness and the way that God designed them to be, and to recognize people with the value that God has given them. That's not what I'm talking about here. We still stand up for those things. But the light that I want to put on this is that what God is saying is, hey, don't allow your fight to overcome evil to conquer you by allowing anger and frustration and evil in our own hearts to take over. In fact, conquer evil with good. Don't succumb to it. An eye for an eye. Romans 12:21 says, don't let evil conquer you, but conquer evil by doing good. So show love whenever and wherever you can. Don't conflate justice with revenge. Don't meet evil deeds with evil intentions. Instead, overcome evil with good. And if you're anything like myself, this can be incredibly challenging, because when we face injustice and things that break our heart, we sometimes want to not only get even, but we want to make sure that the message is really clear. And what it's saying here is, hey, don't allow yourself to succumb to your own sense of justice. Trust God's justice in this, that we would overcome evil with good, that we would lavish love on things that are broken, and lavish patience and peace and kindness and graciousness over things that are broken, so that we can then display the love and graciousness of God in our life to other areas of the world. This is what Romans 12:19 says. Dear friends, never take revenge. Leave that to the righteous anger of God. For the scriptures say, I will take revenge. I will pay them back, says the Lord. Instead, if your enemies are hungry, it says, feed them. If they are thirsty, give them something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals of shame over their heads. Man, you want to dunk on people in this world that are challenging, hard, there's injustice shown. Show them such an overwhelming kindness that they can't help but take notice of the love and graciousness that is undeserved that we want to choose to show them. And, to be honest, this is a very personally challenging passage and message to take to heart. That we would respond in a greater way, not just settling for the justified response, but desiring to see the compassionate response, the Christ-like response in my life. In this passage, Matthew 5, Jesus used this picture talking about a Roman soldier asking you to carry their gear. In the day and age of Jesus, it would be customary that soldiers were allowed to ask citizens to help them carry their gear for a mile, and every citizen was responsible to do so if they were asked. You see an instance of this where Jesus is going to the cross, and the Roman soldier asks a man to come and carry Jesus' cross for him. In the same light, Roman soldiers could ask you or ask me. Imagine if you were stopped today and a police officer said, Scott, can you stop and carry all my gear for me for a mile? My arms are getting tired. And this is what Jesus says. He goes, hey, when you're inconvenienced, when you are commanded, when you are instructed, whether you want to or not to do this, why don't you take it 2 or 3 miles just to show them that there is a kindness and a goodness in your heart. The saying, go the extra mile. It's this principle of, hey, they might expect 1, but let's overcome that with 2 or 3. And there are seasons of life lately that it feels like the world is surrounded with injustice and brokenness. And it's incredibly challenging to our hearts. When life takes an inch, my challenge is we should give it a mile. when you feel like people are taking a piece of you in how they're speaking to you or how they're treating you. And, I'm not talking about here things that are systemic problems or putting yourself in a position of harm. I think those are things that need to be addressed appropriately. But I mean, in our everyday relationships, in our everyday interactions with people, when people are taking an inch, man, give them back a mile. Overwhelm them with the love of God that is in us. Show them that we are more than just flesh and bone, but the Spirit of God is alive in us. And the challenge is, it means surrendering our idea of fairness and giving it to God. God, I don't need what I think is fair. God, I want what you think is fair. And I understand that my life is a result of a grace that is undeserved. One of the things we've said here before, Pastor Jay has this thing written in his office, and I don't know where he got it. Maybe he came up with it, but it says, my debt to God is payable to man. And I think a good principle in understanding that we can overcome evil with good and that we have the strength and ability to do that is to remind ourselves that you and I, as followers of Jesus, are recipients of a grace and a goodness we could never earn. We could never deserve. There's nothing we could do to earn it. And yet it is freely given so lavishly on my life and yours. And so when we see challenging people, frustrations, evil in this world, would we respond to the evil of this world the same way that Jesus responded to the evil in my life? And the way that he responds to the evil in your life, not allowing evil to conquer us or to rule us, but that we would conquer evil by doing good. Tonight we have Pastor Jason Weening joining us, and we want to talk about this principle of non-resistance. It's kind of this new principle, at least in my life, to be thinking about. And the idea is, that we can overcome the evil and the injustice of this world with radical acts of love, kindness, and intentionality, because that's what Jesus did for you and I. And so I'm really excited to share that conversation with you. Why don't you check it out right now, my conversation with Jason Weening. Well, everybody, welcome to another interview. Today we have Pastor, Bishop, Highest Holy Man, Jason Weening with us. Jason is our pastor of operations at Mapleview. And I want to have Jason on because, I wish I had a microphone for a lot of the conversations that we have around the offices here at Mapleview, because between myself, Josh, Pastor Craig, and Jason, I feel like there are some good or just interesting conversations that we always want to repackage or maybe put back out there. And a few weeks ago, this idea of non-resistance, something that I had not necessarily ever heard talked about in that way. Jason was reading a book, learning a little bit more about it, and I thought it was really interesting. So this might be a little bit different of an interview where we're just two people who are interested in the idea and captivated by the thoughts. We're not necessarily experts. And so if we get it wrong, Josh Cannell, when you're watching this back and telling us all the things we got wrong, we're students, Josh, okay? Little good of grace for the students. But Jason, why don't you take a minute, introduce yourself, tell everybody a little bit about yourself if they don't quite know you.
Sure. Hey, everyone. I know a bunch of you of the TYL crew and our future leaders and all that spiel. But I've been on staff at Mapleview here for almost 3 years now. And I've got a bunch of kids, 9 to be exact. And I'm love being a dad, and I'm trying to encourage other dads as much as I can to be intentional about being parents and fathers. And I think that's so important in our society today. Family is just a bedrock, I believe, of totally. Society. And when families hurt, society hurts, and people hurt, and children hurt, and it breaks my heart. So so I got a heart for dads and families and learning and growing. I'm reading a lot. And so pacifism and non-resistance in the last, we're March here. So in the last 2 months since Christmas, Allie got me a bunch of books that I saw in a catalog. And so I've been reading up on a lot of this is Mennonite stuff. So we'll get into some of that. Yeah.
So it's great conversation and even better jam. It's unreal. It's going to be great. I always say Jason's a lifelong learner, and I feel like that's the posture we should take throughout most of our life, and even especially when it comes to our faith and navigating our relationship with Jesus, to be able to have our minds renewed, not just by the Spirit, but also our understanding through the power of the Spirit. So, Jason, why don't you start us off? Help us understand this principle of non-resistance. What is it? Where does it stem from? What does it look like? What is non-resistance?
You hear pacifism, you hear non-resistance, And it's like, okay, are those the same thing? If you'd asked me 2 months ago, I would have said those are the same thing, but they're not. So, the simplest way that I can put it is pacifism is like, you think of the story of Jesus in the boat when there was a storm, and Jesus had peace in the storm. And so pacifism is like fighting against war. And when war stops and there's peace, then we've achieved our goal. There's peace only when there's peace. But non-resistance is still having peace even in the midst of the storm. So as followers of Jesus, even in the storm, we have the peace. And non-resistance is about not resisting the evil, but actively loving your enemy, which is countercultural, which is counter to what my gut wants to do, to fight for justice and stuff like that. So that's just how I keep thinking about it in my mind. Pacifism says there's peace when there's peace. Non-resistance says I still have peace even in the midst of the storm.
Yeah, it's funny you say that inclination and that driving us to want to fight. And I actually don't think that's the issue. I think that's a good thing. I think there's something about us, about injustice and things that grieve the heart of God, that move us. There's a difference between being moved and feeling this desire to need to fight. And I think non-resistance helps draws that line between what is a fight and what is being moved in our hearts and our lives to want to do something about the injustice and the evil that we see. And, if you're anything like myself, or you get cut off on the highway, or any sort of slight, maybe small personal injustices in moments, our human condition always leans a little stronger towards what I would call a justified response, like an eye for an eye. In Exodus, it says in the law given, sometimes can be a justified response to why we're going to get even scripturally. What is it about us that leans more towards a justified response than maybe a compassionate response, where that Jesus would say, no, let's choose to overcome evil with good, kind of like you're talking about here, well, exactly what you're talking about here with this non-resistance. Instead of getting even, it's, no, I'm going to fight almost in love for my enemy.
Yeah, and it's another way that I heard it explained was like, it is loving your enemy. And I'll tell you a story in a minute that really it's a great example of this. But I think of the Good Samaritan who went out of the way to pay, to bandage the wounds, then to pay for the hotel stay. That is an example of non-resistance. Versus pacifism would be more like lying down in the street so that the politicians can't get to their office or something. You're still creating some sort of an inconvenience to try and persuade someone. It's not loving and it's not active, it's passive. But so here, I'll just share that little story. I know we touched on this before. So one of these books I was reading talks about Pastor Peter, and I think he was in Switzerland, if I'm not mistaken. And this is in like the 1700s. And he is lying in bed at night in an old like thatched roof house, which you may have seen if you've ever seen old European style, books or drawings or paintings. Anyways, thatched roof. So Pastor Peter's lying in bed at night. He hears something's going on the roof, and he's like, what's going on up there? And so he goes outside. First of all, he was not liked in his town. He was a preacher. He was sharing the gospel. And so he already knew he had enemies in town. Yeah. So he opens his door, looks out on the roof, sees these guys, these young vandals, tearing the thatch off his roof and throwing it down. And he thinks about this and understands what they're doing. And he doesn't yell at them. He doesn't throw stones at them. He doesn't say, get off my grass, you kids. He goes inside and he wakes his wife up and he says, honey, there's workers on the roof, and can you just get up and prepare a meal for them? And she's a little bit confused about that, but she does do that. She cooks, gets a fire started, makes a meal for these workers. And then Pastor Peter goes out and calls the men down and says, hey guys, we've prepared a meal for you. We'd like you to come into our house and share a meal with us. And these guys are totally shocked. They come down into the house and they sit down at the table, but they don't even eat. They are just sitting there and they won't eat. And you can imagine the awkwardness around that table, right? Like, are you kidding me? This is what's happening? And then they don't eat, but they slowly leave and then go back up onto the roof and then start repairing the holes and the damage that they've done on his roof and they fix his roof and then go away. And that story, like when I read that, man, it just is, it fights everything in me. Like,
totally. That was really one of the first instances and stories that you had talked about in your office with me about like an example. And I'm a story guy. Like I want to see the narrative. I want to understand the picture. It's good to understand it, but I want to be able to visualize it. I think that's a great picture for what and how and the purpose of when we're talking about this non-resistance principle of not just loving your neighbor by being nice to them, but this overcoming evil and injustices and things that grieve the heart of God with intentional acts of love, kindness, and things that are counter to evil. You know what I mean? It's not just about resisting evil. It's not just about, like you're saying, pacifism, blocking away for evil to get through, but it's about actively, maybe we are fighting back, but our fight is through intentional love and care and demonstrations of the power of the gospel in our own life. That's why I love that story. Like, it catch me on a bad day, even probably on a good day, I probably would have handled that situation differently. And yet, you see how like the content and the character of his life because of the gospel moved him to do something differently and fight that battle in a different way. And that's where I really feel like as a society we are at. And I think there are people that rightfully so, you know, it can feel like whether it's faith-based or their local businesses are under attack with these, they feel like it's under attack with these shutdowns or just personal freedoms maybe feel like they're being taken away. How do we respond to that? And that's where I found this conversation around non-resistance so timely, because it's really about how believers, we are going to choose to respond. And I love that. I think one of the benefits is in today's culture, there seems to be a rise in understanding of justice and human rights, you know, and dignity for people. It's at the forefront of people's minds, I think more than maybe it has been in previous generations.
Yeah.
And as a result, there seems like there's these cultural, I would say, growing pains in how it's demonstrated, how it's realized, what's the best practice, what's too far, what's not far enough. And I think this principle that you're sharing, it helps set up believers to really display the gospel in a really interesting way in a world that desires justice. And so what are some ways that how this could be a big step forward for believers in how we choose to demonstrate this justice it feels like the Western church and the Western culture is longing for?
Well, I think, like you said, there's these protests that we could be going to fight these issues and things like that. And well, you said at the beginning, I'm not sure where I land exactly on all of this. And I am trying to sort this out too. So this is literally just a dialogue of ideas here. And so all that to say, okay, we can fight for things that are unjust and things like that. And I've been part of organizations and groups involving sex trafficking and things like that, where we're trying to help bring awareness and fight that injustice. But also, like, Jesus was ultimately unjustified. Like, what happened with Jesus, and he stood there silently before Pilate, was the perfect man was crucified. And that was the ultimate injustice that could have happened. And he stood there and didn't say anything there. And it was because of his love for us and his love for mankind. And it goes back to the whole idea of love, which in Matthew 5, and I think it's 38 to 48, is kind of the section that talks about loving your enemy and stuff like that. And the fruit of the Spirit, well, what's the first fruit of the Spirit? You all know the list. The first fruit of the Spirit is love. And until I started reading some of this curriculum or some of these books about love and non-resistance, you know, I'd had these ideas of love, like, okay, I love my wife, I love my kids, but loving your enemy, I think we need the Holy Spirit to love our enemies, because our flesh does not want to do it. And now I'm beginning to see how that is a fruit of the Spirit. When our love is overcoming our sense of indignity or of something being unjust, that is where I can see that is like a Holy Spirit kind of love. That is not logical. It is not, doesn't make sense. It's the opposite of everything screaming inside of me of what should be done. But it's love. That's the key word. And Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Like that's what separates, I believe, Christianity from a lot of other religions, is our love for our enemies. And looking historically, even in the Roman times, and as Christians were being martyred, Jesus was praying on the cross, forgive them, Lord, they don't know what they do. And it was the love of the Christians that was influencing their society, even to the death. And in stories about martyrs and
people who actually lived this instead of just kind of talked about it.
Yeah.
Romans 12:19, it says, I'm going to read it here just so I don't mess up. It says, dear friends, it says, never take revenge. Leave that to the righteous anger of God. For the scriptures say, I will take revenge. I will pay them back, says the Lord. Instead, if your enemies are hungry, feed them. If they're thirsty, give them something to drink. And in doing this, you will heap burning coals of shame over their heads. And, I feel like in this conversation, it can begin to feel like, not like a wet blanket or like we're just going to love our way out of it. But I think there is an empowerment that comes to choosing to love people the best we can, in knowing that, we don't love defenseless. We love fortified, that God is.
Well, it's a love out of strength. It's not a love out of weakness.
Exactly. And I think the real strength in the life of a believer, and the thing that takes a lot of effort and intentionality, is not falling to our own vices and fleshly response. And that's what I see in this, is what overcome evil with good is to almost say, and really is to say, don't allow yourself to be conquered by the evil that you're facing by meeting it at that level. Overcome. And I think that's the challenge I see here with non-resistance is, we're going to fight back. It's not from a weak position. And I like that distinction you make between pacified and non-resistance. Like right now, Isla is 4 days old, and there are moments I want to pacify the issue, like quite literally. And this is not just stopping it, it's actually actively fighting against it. And I think that's the difference sometimes in why I like it that way, because it kind of leaves the responsibility still on us to do something about it. And it asks me big questions of, hey, in our culture and society, what is non-resistance when it comes to how we respond to COVID-19 or how we respond to these lockdowns? What is overcoming what people see as frustrations and disappointments and things that are graining on us as believers? Okay, what is the response that is the non-resistance response to overcome with good? I'm inspired by that and challenged by that personally, at least, to go, it's my responsibility to push back evil with good and trust that as I do it, Jesus is pushing the ball down the field, so to speak. It's incredibly challenging. And why don't you tell everybody what you're talking about with your neighbor in terms of like these little tiny steps?
For sure.
That was amazing.
Well, that's what I think it is. I think we're talking about, there are these big picture issues and political things and cultural trends and big government programs and policies, and there needs to be change in some of those areas as well. But I think we need to hone it down a little bit and focus on, like, literally love your neighbor as yourself. And so how I've been challenged by that is like, okay, literally, I have two elderly couples that live across the road from us. And it's like, okay, well, how do I show them love? They're cancer survivors. And so they're very, they want to stay safe and everything like that. I'm like, okay, well, how do I show them love practically? And it's like, okay, well, they're not going to come over to my house for dinner. They're not going to invite me to their house for dinner. And so literally last week, okay, big snowstorm. So I went over there with some of my kids and we snow blow their driveway. We've got chickens at home, so I'll go there now and then and bring them a dozen eggs or something like that. But like small personal acts of kindness, and being, I think, not just physical acts like that. We just had a baby, baby Mabel. She's a month old today, actually.
Look at us new dads. Wow, we're just us young guys.
Stick together, all of us young guys. I know. Anyway, so the midwife came to visit us the other day, and when we were at the hospital, she mentioned something about being terrified about her job or whatever. They have to be very safe with all their procedures and what they're doing and wearing masks and covers and all that stuff. Anyways, she used the word terrified, and it stuck out to me. And we've had a couple visits with her since then. And I've always kind of had, I believe, a nudge from the Holy Spirit, like, hey, what was that all about? So on Sunday or whatever, she was at our house, and I was like, hey, you mentioned at the hospital that you were terrified. Like, that's a strong word. Were you terrified about getting COVID? Are you terrified about your job? And so we talked about that a little bit. And I said, we're followers of Jesus. That's no surprise to her. I said, can I just pray with you for a minute while you're here? I know you got another appointment, and just pray for peace for you, whatever, if you're having fear and worry. And again, so it's a one-on-one interaction. And I had kind of honestly put it off 3 or 4 times, but had that little tug on my heart. And so I just spent a minute there, prayed with her, and there were 3 or 4 of my kids there too. So trying to show my kids too, like, hey, take opportunities to witness to someone. But anyway, so I just prayed with her that God have peace, and she was crying when it was done. And just, again, it's not the big thing. We're not going to have a protest down at City Hall. It's just me talking to her, going to snowblow the neighbor's driveway. I know you guys wrote letters for Roberta Place there a few weeks ago. Small little individual acts of love, I think, hopefully will produce great rewards.
Yeah, and I think of it kind of in 2 streams of, one is that as we actively and proactively create those little moments, we create a track record as believers of people that, despite maybe some misunderstandings we have with people who don't share our beliefs, they can see the evidence of our life, of a track record of, yeah, you know what, I'm going to shovel your driveway, I'm going to get you all those little things.
Yeah.
There's one thing just to establish a track record of legitimacy that, hey, we're not just talk, we are people of action. And second of all, it becomes so ingrained with us that when we come up against people who are vitriol about it, like they're maybe mean-spirited and they don't have our best interest at heart, like the scripture talks about, our enemy, someone in our opposition to us, that our natural inclination becomes love and choosing to love them. And you and Jason Small saying, again, like good and similar in terms of like, it's going to become a practice, and it needs to be something that's consistent, so that when the moment comes that we can display a non-resistant attitude in terms of not meeting evil with evil, not even worried about what's being fair. Like,
right.
Giving up, Scott, doesn't have to be fair to you, because I'm called to more than fair. If God gave me what was fair, it would not necessarily be the greatest thing for me to receive. No. And so in the same way, I'm going to be an extension of the undeserved grace that I have been shown. And I think one of the things for us as believers is our entire business, if you will, not that people like calling it a business, but our entire worldview is based on receiving a grace that was not fair and not earned and not deserved, and yet it was freely given. And when I see this non-resistant attitude and kind of doing away with an eye for an eye, it's really embodying and emulating, I don't need to get what's fair. I want to give what's above and beyond fair. Whether they're my friend, whether they're my enemy, I want to embody this love above and beyond that forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, which I think is great. And I think it's timely because it can be easy and easier, especially with things like lockdowns, to succumb to our maybe not always spirit-led attitude.
Well, and it's not fair. And I think it's a sacrifice too. And it's little sacrifices. Like, I think Jason Small told the story of pulling someone out of the ditch or something like that. Or okay, I'm done my snow blowing my driveway. Now I'll go snow blow their driveway. Like, we're called to be, and I think you touched on it in that Romans 12 verse 1. It says we need to offer our bodies as living sacrifices. Like, it's about sacrifice, loving to our own hurt. And it's the opposite of what the world would want us to do, to fight fire with fire.
Yeah.
It's to love. And it's a logic. It's not logical according to earthly logic. It's foolishness to the world, but it's heavenly kingdom logic. Logic isn't even the right word, but it's thinking on a different way of thinking. And we need the Holy Spirit. It's not just our own physical mind isn't going to get us there. That's why it's a fruit of the Spirit, love.
Well, I always think it's funny in this season when people like talk about, well, we're standing up for our religious freedom. And I'm like, well, you are now religiously free to die to yourself and your own selfish ambitions. I think that's just, I've caught myself on that a few times. So like, okay, well, I am free to be a slave to love and the fruit of the Spirit in my life. Well done, Scott. You've really put yourself in a great position now. Jason, as we go tonight, if Jason's lifelong learner, I'm sure, since, you're still a new dad, so you're really in the same boat as all of these young adult guys. You're still one of these young guys. But if you could speak to your younger self, what is something that you would want your younger self to know at this stage of life that you find yourself in, 9 kids later, probably 50,000 books later, farther along down the road? What would you say to your younger self?
I would say, keep your mouth shut.
Are you talking to me now, or are you talking to
I'm talking to my younger self. I've made lots of apology phone calls to brothers-in-laws and cousins and people and I've become, I think Jay said it in church a few weeks ago, a wise man once said nothing. And, I heard someone else say, unless you can improve on the silence, don't break it. And
that's
so my advice would have been, hey, 20-year-old Jason or 25-year-old Jason, just.
Well, not said. Perfect. Well, thanks, Jason, for joining us. So glad to have you with us, guys. Check out Jason's Instagram. He's talking about his passion for dads. It's all over his social media. Some of my favorite videos to watch is when Jason's doing something with his kids, trying to encourage other dads. You will hear the phrase, "Hey, dads," more than you ever even thought possible. You got to check it out. You can check him out at Jason Weening. Jay Weening? Jason Weening?
I think it's Jay Weening on Instagram and Jason Weening.
Look at him go. Follow him. And there might be a podcast of his coming out soon, a little plug of some potential there. But thanks so much for joining us today, Jason. And everybody else, back to the cast.
Thanks, Scott.
Well, big, huge thank you to Jason Weening for joining us for the Young Life podcast. Always glad to have him on. I always say, and I've said this probably a few times by now, Jason is a lifelong learner. Great posture for us to have. I'm always challenged. The thing I love about Jason is that he believes big and wants to know the most true thing, but he's also not afraid to admit when he's wrong or change his mind. And that's put a good challenge in my life, I'd say, of, okay, like, reserve the right to change your mind if something becomes illuminated in you, to not be so prideful to just hold to yourself. So I always love a chance to sit down, talk with Jason, and shoot the breeze and go back and forth about all sorts of stuff. He's amazing. We're going to stick online, obviously, until further notice. And, just check with our social and keep track as we kind of keep going to see what the news is with Young Life. And I was talking with the cast earlier a bit about, sometimes our conversation around lockdowns and all this kind of stuff, it can be frustrating. So I want to talk about making the most of it. What's something awesome, something positive, something good that you tried, that you love since the beginning of lockdown? What's something new that you've done and maybe something else someone else can do? I think a lot of the situation in season is just trying to make the most of a maybe not ideal situation. So what's something you've tried or loved to do during lockdown the last little bit?
I started an Audible subscription. I'm really enjoying it. Started my first book, and it's a worthy investment for sure.
Yeah. Okay. Weird fun fact. I had an Audible subscription. In fact, I still have an Audible subscription, and I forgot that I had it for a year and a half. So I got a year and a half's worth of books that I need to buy.
That's awesome.
But it's totally awesome. If you're a runner or you're working from home and you like listening to books, that's a great one, Aiden. Really awesome. Totally. Someone else. What's someone else you guys have tried?
I've started trying to read more books instead of just sitting in front of the TV watching it all day. So that's what I've been trying to get into the habit of doing.
Yeah, that's awesome. Elliot, what about you?
Yeah, no, for me, is my mic not working again?
No, you're okay.
I bet. It's been running. I said it in multiple episodes prior to. It's just been running. I mean, the weather these past couple of days have not been really permitting, but whether that's on my treadmill in my basement or outside, it's just, I think just getting outside of being inside is something that I think a lot of people need to do, because it gets boring.
Totally.
So
Totally.
I think that just changing your scenery, even for like 20 minutes, will make all the difference.
Yeah, and try to reframe our perspective a little bit. And I know
Right.
it's challenging, but like make the most of it. One thing, if anybody listening is down, one thing we did start in COVID with the boys is there's a group of guys from Young Life in a group chat who play Call of Duty together.
Yo.
And guys or gals, just throwing it out there. It is the bomb. Shout out to Snipe Skills 33, Nick Burden up there. Also Aiden, the killer, 22 kill game. Oh, chef's kiss. Anyway, no one else cares. But my point is this: like, try something new. If you want to connect, if you need to feel like you need to connect with people, do something new. Do something you haven't done before. I've never necessarily played Call of Duty with that many people that consistent. But it's good to connect and kind of get your mind off stuff and try to make the most of a challenging situation. And, as we go tonight, maybe the best way or an easy one is this Sunday. Why don't you come for small group? It's maybe a new thing to start in lockdown, a great chance. You can also play Call of Duty with us, but you'll probably be more spiritually fed maybe joining us for small group with Ben and Aiden, or Jody Speck, her women's Bible study ladies get together. And as we go today, we want to know our question of the week: what is your favorite local spot in Barrie, a place that you're going to check out this week or the week after? We want to know. We'll give them a little bit of a shout out. Some of the local spots in Barrie, whether it's a restaurant, it can be a business, anything you want. Your favorite local spot in Barrie that people should know about that they don't. What is the name of Jordan Teese's mom's restaurant? Do you guys know?
Urban Dish.
Urban Dish. Shout out to Urban Dish. That's another one that I wanted to mention. Like, that's a great spot as well. Check out Urban Dish if you need a little date night. Ben, actually, you should order the Urban Dish for the next date night you have with the lucky lady as you guys read an apologetics book together. It's going to be great. So Urban Dish, it's going to be awesome. Make sure you check it out. Support local. We can't wait to be back in person. But until then, we're going to make the most of the situation we find ourselves in. And you know what? We'll catch you guys next week.